Welcome to Bring It Home. I'm your host, Craig Fuller with J.P. Hampstead. This is the podcast about the reindustrialization revolution that's taking place right now in the Americas. It is the most exciting development in our economy since the expansion of the U.S. economy in the post-world decade. What is happening right now on the ground in America is tremendous. So many new manufacturing and infrastructure jobs are coming into our economy, as well as new announcements by corporations all over the world are investing in the Americas, and this is the show that's celebrating that. As we walk through the journey of the reindustrialization revolution, we're going to talk about major headlines each week that are highlighting the investments that are made to bring in new manufacturing jobs and expansion across the Americas, as well as bring in guests that are going to give their perspective on what they're seeing down in the reindustrialization of America. Now, one thing to be clear is this is not an angry show. We're not talking about all of the things that are costing Americans with globalization. We are celebrating America and why we will win and why America will win the next decade and the next century will be known as the third American century. With that, I want to bring in J.P. Hampstead. He's got some headlines for the week to talk about what we are seeing on the ground. J.P.
Yes, thanks, Craig. Super excited about this show and celebrating all the great things that are happening on the ground in America. Our first headline is about Americans getting back in shape, losing weight. Eli Lilly is massively expanding its production facility in Lebanon, Indiana. They had originally planned to invest $3.7 billion in GLP-1 weight loss drug manufacturing. They've increased that investment from $3.7 billion to $9 billion, and announced that recently. So huge ramp up, meeting growing and surging demand. It's an interesting story. Craig, do you have thoughts on?
Yeah, GLP-1 drugs. This is Ozempic. This is not Eli Lilly's version, but it's a GLP-1, which is in the same class of drugs that Ozempic is. Mounjaro and Wegovy, which were originally started out as diabetes drugs. They've realized that one of the byproducts of the way that the chemicals react with the bodies is that it actually helps people lose weight. And now these drugs have become predominantly weight loss drugs. And what they've realized is not only does it help prevent or solve prediabetes, it also things like strokes and heart disease. And it's all about reducing inflammation. So this is, the concept of GLP-1 drugs is important. But more importantly, I think it shows that the investment that Eli Lilly is making is putting that investment in the United States means that they are very bullish on not only this class of drugs, but the ability to produce them here in the U.S. There's been so much conversations over the last decade about a lot of our drug and pharmaceutical supply chain dependent on places like India and China. This is an example of producing it here in the United States to serve American consumers. And let's be honest, American consumers are going to be major
this might be the biggest market for the weight loss drug.
I mean, there's a bunch of memes on social media, on X, about does NVIDIA or the GLP-1 drugs actually become the hottest investment class of the next decade?
That's interesting.
Is it semiconductors or weight reduction? So I would say the GLP-1s are certainly a proven market.
Yeah, it makes sense to locate the production close to the end consumer in small town America. And I think it's a great story. I think just in general about the pharmaceutical industry, which sometimes in the media is controversial, but their prices, their profits, they're dealing with government regulation. But the fact remains that it's always been a center of American innovation. It employs tons of people, and it's It's a great story.
One more point. I don't know if you caught this, but one thing about Eli Lilly is they're bypassing the traditional pharmacy supply chain. They're actually going direct to consumer with this class of drug, and they are writing prescriptions directly to consumers so that they don't essentially have to go through a traditional pharmaceutical supply chain, which I think is an interesting story in
So
itself.
they don't have to go to their doctor.
Yeah, well, they have to go through a doctor. They still need a prescription, but they don't have to go through a Walgreens or CVS.
I see. They can order it from Eli Lilly
online, and Eli Lilly will fulfill it. I think that's a huge story.
That's interesting. So it's a fulfillment play as well, like a logistics fulfillment.
Yeah, it's a logistics fulfillment play direct to consumer.
It's fascinating. Another second headline we have, I think, which speaks to the premise of this show about reindustrialization and the manufacturing renaissance in the United States, is sort of about the growing bipartisan consensus about protecting American industry from foreign competition, creating rules around trade that help bring jobs back. The Biden administration has finalized tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, raising those tariffs from 27.5% to 100%, raising tariffs on electric vehicle batteries, as well as some of the key sort of materials and minerals that go into them. I think a 25% tariff on Chinese-made solar cells and a few other things like that. Those rules, which have been sort of worked on by the Trade Department for a while, have now been finalized.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the whole tariffs on electric vehicles, is a lot of these. So, just a couple of things. One is the Biden administration has not reversed any of Donald Trump's tariffs. They've done it a bit quieter or a little bit less verbose and sort of aggressive in terms of their stance, but ultimately they have agreed with the Trump approach towards tariff, which is we want to protect certain types of industries. And yes, there's an economic value short term. I think the bigger argument is that tariffs do two things. One is they increase the cost of those goods and make American goods more competitive, but potentially they help protect these industries that we view as strategic down the road, that rather than shutting down production and losing the talent and the knowledge workers that work in these industries, by slowing down imports of these goods, we're actually able to protect those industries and the production here in the United States.
Yeah, so a good example of this is actually the Chinese electric vehicles. There's many companies in China, OEMs, that make these cars. They're relatively unknown in the United States, although they are increasing in popularity in Central America, for example. But it's really, this doesn't feel like a tariff that's going to increase prices for the U.S. consumer unless you're in the market for a $12,000 Chinese car, right? It's about the Biden administration going to American automotive manufacturers and saying, hey, we want you to make really big investments in these factories and in these jobs and think about, re-engineer your product lines. By the way, we're going to make sure that you don't get undercut 2 years into this process or 3 years into this process if China decides to make an aggressive play in the United States. So I think this feels like something that isn't that impactful to the consumer, and again is more about providing cover and assurances in a partnership with strategic manufacturers like Ford Motor Company, for example.
I mean, automotive is one of those sectors where America, in terms of manufacturing, the automotive sector is an area where America is still leading in terms of manufacturing cars. We've not lost that. In fact, over the last 50 years, we've seen an enormous amount of foreign manufacturers build plants here in the United States. The risk or the fear is that through both financial engineering and the part of government manipulation of financial markets in China, but also the amount of engineering talent through their schools and other resources, that the Chinese have a lot of advantages in electric vehicles that they didn't have with the internal combustion engine. A couple of years back, I had breakfast with the former CEO of J.D. Power, and he was telling me this, and this has been 2017, and his comment to me was that China will win the EV race. The more that we move towards electrification of our automotive sector, China has an enormous amount of advantages. And his proof point was that there are 300 OEMs in China that produce electric cars. And in the United States, look at the internal combustion engine. We have 4 domestic manufacturers that actually still produce internal combustion engines. But basically, China is trying to leapfrog because they can't compete with the ICE car. They just don't have the engineering talent to go produce those traditional industries. So they've effectively tried to leapfrog into electric vehicles. The more that we put electric vehicle investment and requirements and regulations, the more it actually favors China. One of the ways to fight that is to provide some type of backdrop or tariff to protect those industries so that we can build up that manufacturing base.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things about how this story is playing out is that, of course, the automotive supply chain in the United States is not just Detroit or Southeast Michigan, but it's really a sort of a north-south belt that goes through North America from Ontario into central Mexico.
And it is, the South is winning. I mean, a lot of the new manufacturing plants that have been created in the automotive sector are taking place throughout the South. You've got, BMW opened up its Spartanburg, South Carolina plant a couple decades ago. Mercedes opened up an Alabama plant a couple decades ago. Toyota has moved into, 50 years ago, moved in Kentucky. Nissan is in Tennessee. Volkswagen's in Tennessee. Ford, which we're going to talk about, the Blue Oval plant, is the largest manufacturing auto plant in the world, is opening up, is being built in Memphis, Tennessee, which I think is a really important story in itself. Speaking of Memphis, I want to invite Bill Dunavant, chairman of Dunavant Enterprises. Bill, tell us a little bit about Dunavant Enterprises.
First of all, Craig, thank you for having me. I am chairman of Dunavant Enterprises. I am a 6th generation Memphian, 3rd generation of our company. We were formerly the largest raw cotton trader in the world, and as a byproduct of that was our supply chain company within Dunavant to move 6 million bales globally, spending about $250 million in supply chain. We exited that business in 2010, kept the supply chain piece of the business in conjunction with our real estate group and our investment group.
So you guys are long-term Memphis, and you've invested deep in that whole Memphis economy. You've seen Memphis go through a lot of different generations and change over the company's history. But more importantly, there is a renaissance taking place in Memphis that a lot of people just aren't paying attention to.
Well, I think they are starting to pay attention to it because we in Memphis clearly are America's supply chain capital. Okay, when you say America's supply chain capital, that's a big statement to make. But when you can reach 95% of global GDP in 72 hours from your city, that's pretty special. When you can reach 75% of the American population in 48 hours by truck, that's why we're America's distribution capital with companies locating in Memphis. And it's continuing to grow and continuing to get better and better for Memphis.
So a lot of folks know about FedEx, but the legacy of Memphis, the Mississippi River has driven Memphis's economy for really since the birth of America. I mean, it's been such an important port city. A lot of movement of commodities, agricultural commodities, specifically cotton being one. There's a lot of other reasons to be bullish on Memphis other than just FedEx. I mean, you've got all the natural resources that you have in Memphis. Tell us a little bit about what makes Memphis really special in terms of just natural resources.
So when you look at the river, obviously, that's our history. There were no roads, there were no rails, pre-Civil War. Memphis got its founding by the river, and the river is still there. We have the fifth largest inland port in America today. But when you look at the conjunction of interstates that come through Memphis, 3rd most traffic corridor in America with I-40, companies are coming and realizing the critical scale in Memphis and why we're there with the 5 Class 1 rails, with the 2nd largest freight airport in the world, with the port, with the roads. You put all that together from a supply chain perspective, Memphis is where you need to be. And from a distribution perspective, from Nike's North American Distribution Center is in Memphis, Milwaukee Tools in North Mississippi, Williams Sonoma, just over and over and over, companies are coming to Memphis for what I said, the ease and ability to move product in and out of Memphis.
And so much of what is driving the change is this idea that America has gone from globalization to deglobalization. And companies are thinking differently about where they locate and why they locate back in America. They're looking at Memphis because of the labor force and the resources, but also the logistics network. But you guys have had some major wins in recent years. Blue Oval's auto plant, tell us a little bit what's happening there.
Well, obviously, Ford Blue Oval, in conjunction with SK Battery out of South Korea, is making the biggest investment in American history in an automobile manufacturing plant just outside of Memphis. It's going to be the next generation of Ford's electric truck. You talked about that early, the electrification of EVs coming back to America. Quite frankly, when you look at Ford's investment of over $6 billion and probably another couple of $1 billion with the manufacturers co-locating with them, you're looking at an $8 billion investment in Tennessee. You couple that with the battery plant that's going into North Mississippi, the truck battery plant with Cummins and PACCAR. That's another $2 to $3 billion. You couple that with the other investments across Tennessee, it adds up to $18 billion in EV investment in Tennessee alone. And you look at that and you go south in Arkansas. And you look at the lithium deposit in the Smackover Formation in southern Arkansas. And that's being mined by Exxon and Albemarle. Some of the bigger companies are there. And so 2 plus 2 is 4, right? Because you got the one of the largest lithium deposits in southern Arkansas. And you got all this investment going into Tennessee, North Mississippi. The first contract was just let with Exxon supplying SK Blue Oval with 100,000 metric tons per year of lithium. Well, we're all in the supply chain business. Yeah. Southern Arkansas to Memphis, Tennessee is not very long from a supply chain perspective, and every mile is $1. And so the closer you are, the more value there is. And we're very proud that this is all coming to Memphis.
So is it just Blue Oval, or are we seeing other manufacturing move into?
Well, you've got the co-locators that are going to help supply different components to the truck at Blue Oval, all locating on that 4,200 acre site called Blue Oval City. I think there's 6 companies co-locating with Ford SK. The battery plant in North Mississippi, just batteries for trucks. Okay, and that's a tri-venture, Cummins, Daimler, and PACCAR.
So you got, I mean, that's the great thing about auto plants. We know in Chattanooga, Tennessee, having Volkswagen here has driven a lot of the auto manufacturers and OEMs require their suppliers to be located near them.
Yes, they do.
Which certainly benefits it. But there's been a number of other announcements outside of Blue Oval and the Blue Oval infrastructure that is also happening around Memphis. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, obviously the latest, biggest headline that Memphis is incredibly proud of, Elon Musk has chosen Memphis to locate his artificial intelligence supercomputer, the largest supercomputer in the world for XAI. We were awarded that in June of this year. A lot of work's gone into it, a lot of money's been invested, but the fact that Elon Musk is coming to Memphis and building the largest supercomputer in the world and is already in discussions of doubling that size. We all know that AI is all over the world right now. And clearly Elon Musk is a game changer in everything he touches, from Tesla to SpaceX to Starlink to Neuralink to the Boring Company. We are so blessed that he chose Memphis to come to us, and he's down on President's Island. He chose Memphis for 3 reasons. Speed. We had the old Electrolux plant, 800,000 square feet on 600 acres that was ready to go. We sit on the greatest aquifer in the world, not America, in the world. We have 100 trillion gallons of water under Memphis, Tennessee, and it's reestablishing itself every single day. We all, including Chattanooga, have the greatest power supply in the world with TVA. We all are so blessed in the region of North Alabama, North Mississippi, Tennessee to have TVA as our federal power source.
Yeah, it's like Saudi Arabia of electricity here in Tennessee.
Absolutely.
We just produce so much of it. You mentioned the water. Now, where is that water coming from? It'd be an aquifer.
Yeah, so obviously we have the benefit of the second largest river in the world coming right by Memphis every single day. And we have the aquifer under Memphis. It's called the Memphis Sands. And it goes down probably 2,000 or 3,000 feet. And it's been there forever. And it is some of the cleanest water in the world that's pumped out of the ground. And that's verified, not by me, by many scientists. And so the fact that it's reoccurring, we live along the Mississippi River. You referenced the Mississippi River earlier. We are America's breadbasket in the Memphis region. Okay, but we've got agricultural production on some of the most fertile land in America that's sustainable because of our water supply. And you look around the world with global shortages in water and people using water where they shouldn't need to, we have a sustainable supply, and it's reoccurring. When you think about Memphis, 60% of American grain production, corn, soybeans, rice, passes under our bridge at Memphis every year going to New Orleans to the global markets. So not only is Memphis the beneficiary of the global supply chain distribution capital of the world, we also are an agricultural base. And you look at one of the largest land buyers in Arkansas today is Bill Gates. What is he seeing? He believes in sustainable agriculture and what's going on.
Just an amazing story. I know it's something that you've been passionate about. There's continues to be a lot of attention around the incentives that the state of Tennessee is given, but also some federal incentives. Is that driving a lot of, do you think that cities should be continuing to make those kinds of investments?
Well, I mean, so obviously Ford Blue Oval received incentives from the state of Tennessee, from the federal government with the EV subsidies. Elon Musk did everything without any government subsidies. He wanted to move very quickly, and we're very proud of him and how he did it. He's looking at our water supply, and he knows how valuable that resource is to America, and specifically Memphis. He's offered to come in and work with Memphis Light Gas and Water, with TVA, to build a gray loop, to take treated water before it goes into the Mississippi River and cool it and use it to cool those computers, not using our fresh water. And that's under discussion and probably going to be under manufacturing. That could be a first in America, to build the largest gray loop in America. That's good environmental work and good environmental steward to come into our city and offer that. And I think all of us in America and all of us in Memphis are incredibly proud of that fact.
So, I mean, you highlighted, I mean, water is so important in the industrialization process, because if you're building something or even computing power, you need to cool it. A lot of manufacturing components need water. That feels like an underappreciated part of the story of Memphis, is just how important access to available clean water is in terms of driving the success of Memphis.
Call me anytime, I'll sell the story, because America needs to know the importance of what Memphis means to the whole Mid-South region. I mean, Memphis is a victim of two borders, Mississippi and Arkansas. Memphis borders on both. I don't consider them borders. I consider North Mississippi, with 60 million square feet of distribution and manufacturing space, literally across the border. You go across the river in eastern Arkansas, a lot of people don't realize this. Mississippi County, Arkansas, north of Memphis, Tennessee, up the river, is the largest steel manufacturing county in America today. The largest steel manufacturing county in America is 40 miles north of Memphis. So I think Memphis is doing a great job telling their story. The Smackover region for the lithium in South Arkansas, the steel manufacturing in North Arkansas, the distribution network down in North Mississippi, Federal Express in Memphis, the rails, the roads. It's a story that people know about, but they're beginning to realize. And when you talk about reshore, onshore America, people coming back to Memphis with our rails, we've got 5 Class 1 rails. We have 3 million lift capacity of containers. Well, when you think about 3 million containers from the East Coast and West Coast coming into Memphis, from a carbon footprint standpoint, that's a hell of a lot better than putting trucks on the road, less wear and tear on the road, less fuel being burned. You get it into the center of the country, and we'll redistribute it from Memphis within 48 hours to 75% of the population of America. So it's a story to be told from the CEO's office to the CFO's office, the CLO's office. If you are looking for supply chain value, you need to consider being in the Mid-South region of Memphis.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, just the whole logistics network, JP, that is driving the success of Memphis. I mean, FedEx is sort of the poster child of sort of the modern e-commerce logistics industry, but you can't forget about the power of the river, nor the railroads. And you guys have 5 of the major 6 Class 1 railroads running through Memphis. Outside of Chicago, that gives them an enormous amount of advantage.
It's fascinating to think about the generations of transportation infrastructure, starting with the river, the rails, the roads, obviously the airport, and how Memphis is the central location has made it such an important node. Bill, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how civic leaders work with companies, whether it's like Ford or X, Elon Musk, to be business friendly, to be sort of hospitable environments for businesses to come in. How can community leaders help lead the reindustrialization of America?
So it's a loaded question because I'm chairman of the Chairman Circle for the Memphis Chamber right now, and I'm very biased to the job that they do, with especially some of the wins that we've had. And I think we just discussed some of the reasons it's easy to locate in Memphis. Our Memphis Chamber and our economic development team and recruiting team, has one motto: just learn how to say no, learn how not to say no. Answer all the questions that businesses need as they come back in and ask the questions. It's critical. I mean, if you're going to relocate a business from China or India or wherever back to America, workforce is critical. Education is critical. Water, power is critical. Gas is critical. Supply chain is critical. And again, I think Memphis and the Memphis region has the ability to check those boxes and check them very efficiently.
Power is something that is often not on people. When people think about industrialization, they think about labor supply, which actually is it's a really important aspect when people are building plants, is where do they get the labor, both in terms of non-skilled labor, but also skilled labor. So that's one question. America has the finest universities in the world in terms of engineering talent. We do an amazing job there. But the other thing that you need is power. And we've seen what Germany has done in decommissioning nuclear plants. One of the stories that's recently popping up is the reindustrialization of nuclear. Nuclear is coming back. It's actually become part of Donald Trump's campaign platform to bring nuclear back.
Starting on day one, I will approve new drilling, new pipelines, new refineries, new power plants, new reactors. We will create more electricity also for these new industries that can only function with massive electricity.
TVA has been a leader. They were still building nuclear plants when nobody else would.
And in the debate, Kamala Harris clarified that she's not opposed to fracking.
I will not ban fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil.
I mean,
they realize you have to have energy.
Has implications for energy is how everything happens.
Yeah,
right?
And I think that's why America is going to win again. Is we have so much supply of energy under the ground with natural gas and oil here in the U.S. and with great policy, we can continue to exploit that. But also the natural resources, the river, the hydro plants of TVA, the nuclear investment that's going on, and now even the environmentalists have realized that that nuclear is the cleanest form of energy there is, and the waste is actually quite small, and the chances of something catastrophic happen because of some of the new types of nuclear technology is actually infinitely unlikely. So we're seeing a lot of really excitement developments that are coming in. Bill, what do you think that if there are a couple of things that are driving the success of the South right now, is it policy related? Because it gets talked a lot about tax policy, and when you have employees, we all want business friendly environments. Do you think that's the primary driver of a lot of the reinvestment in the South? Or do you think it's something else that's going on that's driving it?
That's a great question. You first start back with the CEO and CFO. And the tax policies in Tennessee, for that matter, the tax policies in Texas, we don't have state income taxes. So your employees aren't going to pay an income tax. That's a really good place to work across the state of Tennessee. Here in Chattanooga, Nashville, incredible growth. Texas, incredible growth. But you look at this whole migration, and you mentioned it earlier about EV and automobile manufacturing to the southeastern part of the United States. It's not just automotive, it's across the board. We're seeing this migration of reshoring into the southeastern part of the United States. Right to work, can-do attitude, great place to live, great climates. You know, the southeastern part of the United States is booming, okay? There's just no denying that. And I'm so excited to be a part of that, to sell that, to work with government in the state of Tennessee, with Memphis, that companies need to put us on their radar to look at relocating. Because I agree with y'all. With everything in my business that I saw in the raw cotton days, because my whole career was living in Asia and traveling all over the world with raw cotton. And we saw all the textile business in America leave America and go to China and India and all these places. We lost, 70% of our textile manufacturing within 10 years when China's ascension into the WTO. Yeah. And manufacturing going away for labor. Well, now labor is not important with robotics. Robotics takes energy and all that, but America's becoming more competitive. And so, the geopolitical situation, clearly, when you look at the whole world with Russia, the Ukraine, when you look at the Middle East, when you look at potentially out in Asia with China and Taiwan, that makes the C-suite nervous, and rightly so. We saw the disruptions in supply chains throughout the world from COVID and what that means. And a lot of people had the aha moment when container rates go from 3,000 to 20,000. And my financial model completely blew up in my face as a chief financial officer. You need to be working with companies that are focusing on how you get that. Every mile's a dollar is one thing. Having my product arrive is the most important thing. And there's huge value to that. And I really believe when you look at reshore, onshore America, you pointed it out, it's happening as we speak in volume, and it should be. But if you got that labor component, you're of course going to look at Mexico because of the supply chain, because I look at Mexico and the U.S. as just an amazing opportunity, right? But understand, Mexico surpassed China as the largest exporter to America last year. So I'm not making it up. You're not making it up. People are voting with their checkbooks right now. You look at Asia, if you're going to come out of China manufacturing-wise, Vietnam is the growth there is year over year incredible. India, another opportunity from a labor perspective. Those are the focuses we look at. The fastest growing division of our company is our cross-border Mexico operation. I'm really bullish on that. But you're going to have a pain point from trucking, because as Mexico grows, those bridges at Laredo and El Paso can only take so much truck capacity. And that's where we're looking at Memphis with the Burlington Northern, Union Pacific. There are West Coast railroads coming into Memphis, but we're also going to be our Mexico railroads coming into Memphis. And I think that's going to be critically important. One thing I didn't say, we were very blessed 2 months ago. The federal government, in conjunction with the government of Tennessee and the government of Arkansas, have been awarded and are going to build a new bridge across the Mississippi River, the I-55 bridge, America's River Crossing, $1 billion investment in Memphis over the bridge. That's a very old bridge that we've got right now. It's a wise investment, not just for Memphis, Arkansas, Mississippi. It's a wise investment for America because of the supply chain.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure bill is probably the most important act in Congress that we've had in the last decade, because without investment in infrastructure, and it's bigger than if you look at the entire amount of money that went to the interstate highway system, the infrastructure bill that was passed a couple of years back is larger in terms of the amount of money going into infrastructure than we built over the 50 years in the highway system built. I mean, it is massive. But if we're going to reindustrialize America, we've got to have that infrastructure. You mentioned things like bridges. They're not sexy. Like, people do not vote because a new bridge came in, but it is critical to building infrastructure, or to building our industrial base, is building that infrastructure. And America used to win at that, and we're going to get that back.
Not only are we going to get it back, we have to get it back. And I'm not a politician, will never be a politician. The two most important things our country and our government, both local, state, and federal, need to be focusing on. Let's invest in America, because when you talk about reshore, onshore America, you talk about power supply, water supply, gas supply. Our governments, local, state, federal, need to invest in America in infrastructure, but most importantly, education, because our workforce is here. We just have to educate them. And if we do, we're going to win. Crime will go away. You give people a sense of purpose. You give them a sense of purpose by educating them, getting a job. And I'm very strong on that.
I
And
love
it's not
that.
just the universities. We have the finest universities in the world. It's the secondary education that starts very early in their lives, all the way up to the time that they do get into college. Because we have great engineering schools. It's that second part that we're not leading on.
We're not, and you said it, you don't need a college education. Some people can't get a high school education, but can they get a trade school education?
Yeah.
Can they go to a community college? Can they get a welder's license? Can they get a plumbing license, an electrical license? Those are things that give people that sense of purpose and gives them a good salary to make a good living and raise a family and live the American dream. And that's what it's all about.
You can make six figures being a welder or even fixing HVAC units.
Truck drivers,
Truck
make a
drivers.
lot of money.
You can make a lot of money doing the jobs. And one of the things that Tennessee did was passed a law where community college is free, paid for by the state, and that's a big, because there's so much about 4-year college degrees, but in a lot of the data, you got this glut of white collar, college educated degree workers, but you don't have enough of the blue collar workers that are actually doing a lot of the hard work that are out there. And that's an important piece. One thing that I think is underappreciated about the South, there's been a lot of conversation about all of the production moving in. If you look at the industrialization of America, pre-Civil War and even in the early 1900s, early 20th century, the South was sort of left out a lot of industrialization. One of it was a backwater. TVA changed, particularly the Mid-South, changed that. But the thing that I think is often underappreciated is how important refrigeration and air conditioning has been. I was reading a book.
And refrigerated warehousing.
Refrigerated cold chain is really important. Yeah. But so Singapore, if you think about Singapore, it is in a tropical climate. It has been probably the greatest success story of a city-state in the last 100 years that has emerged. In the 1960s, it was a swamp. And the sort of founder of Singapore, who stayed in power for 40 some odd years, credited air conditioning with actually being the reason that Singapore has ascended. And I think that's what's driving the South is, in the old days, we couldn't spend time indoors during the day because it was just so hot.
Yep.
And what air conditioning has done to empower the South means that you need energy supplies, and that is why the South, I think, can continue to win.
Yeah. And it's going to continue that way. And what do you need for refrigeration? What do you need for air conditioning?
Power.
A steady power supply.
Yeah.
Again, I can't stress enough the good work that TVA does. And they're cutting edge. They're leading. And, we had the head of TVA speak to the Memphis Chamber a couple of weeks ago with Ford and with Memphis Light, Gas, and Water on a power panel for Memphis. And to listen to Jeff Lash, the TVA, talk about the future and what is going to be required of TVA from now to 2050. And the fact that TVA is so ahead of the curve in planning for that power really was heartening to me. And you said it. The cleanest, best energy in the world is nuclear. And it's a lot safer than it was 50 years ago, a lot safer. And, the fact that, you can modularize some of these nuclear plants now, not build the big one, you can build the small one. And that technology is only going to get better. But, with the data centers, with the crypto, things that I don't know much about, they use a lot of power, and they get a bad word in some places. But that's where the world is going from technology. I mean, can you imagine? You just said it. What if we didn't have air conditioning? What if we didn't have technology? What if we took the cell phones away from all the young people? They'd go crazy. We'd have a revolution. So you've got to have power. You've got to have infrastructure to continue to build this country for what is the next generation.
But I think that's the underappreciated part of why America will win is our natural resources.
Absolutely.
It's our geography, as you talked about Memphis and the river. We produce 30% more food than we consume, and that is based on today's production cycle. Farmers are often paid not, and you know this better than anybody.
That's pre-Ozempic numbers too.
It's pre-Ozempic
so we're probably
numbers, which is
consuming
8%.
less.
Well, a lot of that food actually goes into the agricultural supply chain. I mean, you know this better than anybody is. We can produce so much more food than we do in the United States today. And then energy is an unsung hero. Nobody wants to admit how important energy is to this whole equation, whether we're talking fossil fuel energies or we're talking things like nuclear. And It is simply an amazing part of our story.
And I think the mining part is going to be a bigger and bigger role going forward. I think early on in the EV race, there was this perception that the United States didn't have like rare earth minerals or certain kinds of like metals that were needed for batteries, but that's not the case. It was just that there were sort of barriers in the way of mining them and accessing them and things like that. So I think as we bring home more of that manufacturing, we're going to look at the United States for those raw materials as well.
Do you think?
I tell you, you look at solar and wind, and I read an article coming over here today about the growth in Texas's power supply through solar, through wind, through nuclear. It's happening in all these states. And I mentioned Texas and Tennessee, TVA, Texas. Why are companies looking at this? Well, you don't have a state income tax and you have an abundant power supply. They're just different ways to skin the cat. And it seems to me like the southeastern part of the United States and Texas are doing it right.
Yeah.
And it's undeniable.
TVA, and a lot of people don't know about it. They may have read about it during high school history, but the TVA story is so remarkable to what it has done for the Mid-South in developing this area, providing persistent supply chains in terms of power persistency. But one of the things underappreciated about TVA is, unlike California, TVA, it's a federal agency, but it's a quasi for-profit. It's got a weird structure. One of the things underappreciated about it is it also has, unlike what you saw out in California with Pacific Gas and Electric, it has invested in protecting the environment, protects the waterways. You can't build anything on the water without their approval. But they're not only just a good steward of power, but they're also a good steward of the environment in doing so.
Very much so. And, there's been, a generational shift away from coal. And obviously you mentioned earlier, the switch to natural gas, of which we have more than we could ever deal with in America, and it is more environmentally friendly. The solar, much more environmentally friendly. Nuclear, incredibly environmentally friendly. We have to always, we all know 100, 200 years from now, what is the environment going to be? And we have to continue to get better every single day with the environment.
Yeah, and hydroelectric. I mean, TVA, that's really where they got the start, was in building hydro. We have some major dams out here in Chattanooga that TVA has built. I live on the side of a mountain, and in that mountain, on the other side of the mountain, they actually have a hydro plant that pumps water up at night. So when the nuclear plants are running 24 hours when they're not down, and so they have a lot of excess energy at night when the grid's not being taxed, and they pump water up from the Tennessee River to the top of this mountain, and they treat it like a battery, and during the day they drain it. And I think it's one of the coolest innovations, and now it's coming back into vogue. It's called Raccoon Mountain, but it's the whole concept of we can store power by basically having a gravity-fed hydroelectric plant when we need it. I think those things are just remarkable, and that's going to continue to drive a lot of the innovation and industrial development here in the United States.
And more importantly, and Tesla's been a big leader in industrial batteries. And how do we take power, like you said, off peak, store it in batteries to use at peak? And so there's some great products coming down the line, and they're only going to get better, right?
Yeah.
You look at EV cars. Whether you believe in EV cars or not, 25 years from now, 30 years from now, it is going to be the future. You look, we didn't have cell phones 30 years ago. They're a pretty important item to have in your pocket today.
Yeah, but there are other ways, just like that hydroelectric battery, that gravity-fed plant that is a battery that doesn't require lithium. There are other ways, and I actually read that TVA is exploring building a second one of those plants because it has been so successful.
It's cool.
But what you're saying is it's an exciting time to be an American.
It is an exciting time to be in America. It's an exciting time to be in logistics supply chain. It's an exciting time to be in trucking specifically because all this stuff's got to be transported.
Got to move.
And we're just incredibly bullish on where America's headed. And that's really the purpose of this podcast. You're on our inaugural episode, Bill, as we try to figure out how to get our own logistics here and talking about this topic. But this is why we're creating it, because we have not had a reconfiguration of the economy to the level that we're going to see over the next decade, and I'm talking global economy, since China opened up its borders, and it is all taking place in America. And for the last 20 years, everyone's talked about how America's losing, and now we have the opportunity to win. It's because these great natural resources, great education, and just great geography that enables us to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's all about, there are a couple of different themes emerging. I think that'll take us through, many episodes of this show. But one of them definitely seems to be how policymakers can recognize, the conjunction of natural resources and supply chain infrastructure, see the opportunity for what it is, and then create policy that allows, capital and business to come in and, create growth.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be with you.
Bring it home, and we're excited to have you here as our audience, excited about what the future looks like for America. Again, this is the show to celebrate the reindustrialization taking place right in front of your eyes here in America. This is going to be the next American century. We're going to continue to move that forward, and really honored to have you tune in each week to bring it home as we talk about the American reindustrialization.